that this was the influence of chaos. His body was resisting its overwhelming power. The Sword King added that chaos was also gnawing at his spirit, warning that nightmares would now constantly plague him. Despite this, Ro-Woon forced himself to remain awake, stating that if he succumbed to the nightmares, chaos would awaken once more. He had anticipated this much. Determined, Ro-Woon stepped away from his masters, turning to face them with a solemn expression. He told them they had to kill him now. The three kings were stunned. Mu Wang was the first to understand, realizing that Ro-Woon had known all along. Ro-Woon proudly asked whose disciple they thought he was, stating that he understood their goal was to seal chaos within his body and annihilate it completely. He then asked if he was right in assuming their true objective was to destroy chaos entirely. The Sword King demanded to know why Ro-Woon had cooperated if he had known the truth. Ro-Woon admitted that he had been betrayed by everyone and left with nothing, unable to trust anyone. However, from them, his masters, he had felt a warmth he had long forgotten. He revealed that revenge no longer mattered to him. What drove him now was a desire to repay the kindness they had shown him. Before they acted, he made one final request: to know their real names. The three kings were silent for a moment before Mu Wang spoke, revealing his name as Shin Yon-wol. The Sword King followed, stating that his name was Sieghard von Damian. Lastly, the Demon King said her name was Virginia. Ro-Woon smiled, saying he now had no regrets. He shouted that he would gladly die there for his masters and closed his eyes, ready to accept his fate. The Sword King stepped forward and placed a hand on Ro-Woon's shoulder. Addressing him by name, the Sword King told him he would not die there. Surprised, Ro-Woon opened his eyes and asked what they meant. The Demon King gently explained that he was their disciple, their child, and Mu Wang added that they could never kill someone like him with their own hands. Ro-Woon reminded them that sparing him would mean abandoning their mission. Softly, the Demon King told him that they would share the burden of chaos within him and seal it together. Since the chaos inside him had been shaped by their teachings, their combined power would be enough to contain it. She explained that after this, the dimensional bindings would release, and Ro-Woon would return to where he belonged. Desperate, he asked what would happen to them. The Sword King replied that they would be sealed somewhere deep within the world. Before Ro-Woon could protest, they pushed him backward into the portal. As he reached for them, they told him to go and never come looking for them. Ro-Woon was curious about how far the power he had learned from his masters could take him. He had already sensed its immense potential. As someone who had once nearly reached the level of a high ranker, he wondered how his abilities would fare against others, not his masters, but humans. Yet, as he stared at Shin Hong, trapped in his hand, he found it all too easy. Shin Hong might not have been at the level of a high ranker, but he was still at least level 150 or higher. Ro-Woon thought that if he could acquire additional powers beyond the Blood Demon art, he would never lose, not to the leader of the Volcano Guild, nor the highest-ranking experts of the Silver Faction. He even imagined surpassing the powers of Einhart, Gehenna, and ultimately, the apex of that world. One hand. He had planned his revenge for over 100 years, but now that it was within his grasp, it felt underwhelming. Shin Hong stuttered his name, begging for his life. Desperate, Shin Hong explained that they had no choice but to betray him. Hearing this, Ro-Woon released his grip on Shin Hong and asked what he meant by no choice. Shin Hong, trembling, replied that otherwise, they all would have died. He claimed that to save their lives, and even Ro-Woon's, there was no other way. Ro-Woon, enraged, asked Shin Hong if he was trying to say he betrayed him to save him. He accused Shin Hong of becoming the raid captain of the Volcano Guild while he endured daily agony. He demanded to know if Shin Hong expected him to believe it was all for his sake. Aiming a black sphere at Shin Hong, Ro-Woon saw panic flood his former friend's face. Shin Hong stammered that he would tell him where the others were. This stunned Ro-Woon, who couldn't believe what he was hearing. Shin Hong, swearing to help Ro-Woon get his revenge if he spared his life. He coldly remarked that Shin Hong, who had already betrayed him once, was now speaking of betraying others. Grabbing Shin Hong's mouth, Ro-Woon told him that once he was dead, the others would hear of it. He instructed Shin Hong to wait for them in hell because they would be joining him soon. Without hesitation, Ro-Woon released a black sphere inside Shin Hong's mouth, causing his former teammate and best friend's head to explode into dust. A moment later, Ro-Woon emerged from the disposal area, effortlessly breaking the chains that locked it. The slaves and guards outside instinctively understood that the man who had broken free from the abyss had defeated the Blackhawks and Kim Shin Hong. He stared at the terrified slaves and thought that, if not for his masters, he might have ended up like them. Releasing several black spheres, he reasoned that if the slaves were left on their own, they would likely die anyway. He might as well end their suffering himself. The slaves and guards screamed in fear and ran, but the black spheres struck them with unerring precision before they could escape. One of the slaves fell to the ground, trembling and crying, stammering that he didn't want to die. However, the black sphere shattered the slave mark imprinted on his body, instead of killing him. Confused, the slave checked his body and realized he was still alive. The other slaves, worried, touched their own bodies and discovered that their slave marks had also disappeared. Lifting his hand to the ceiling, Irun released another blast, causing the cavern to start collapsing. The slaves, realizing what was happening, scrambled to escape. Before leaving, Irun told them they could choose for themselves, whether to die buried under the rubble or to escape alive. As the stones began to fall, he jumped from one to another, making his way out of the collapsing cavern. Standing outside Mujegyong at last, Irun reflected on how, when he first met his masters, all he had wanted was to destroy the world. However, after witnessing their sacrifice, he finally understood his true purpose. Turning around, he thought about the chaos that filled the world and resolved to consume it all, making the chaos his own. Later, the Volcano Guild arrived at Mujegyong. Chung In-woo, the leader of the Red Plum Raid from the Volcano Guild, found the situation absurd and said that he had heard the report, but he didn't think it could be true. In-woo thought to himself that everything started when they gave the raid leader position to some beggar from who knows where, turning the Volcano Guild into this mess. He then asked one of the men about the interrogation of the captured slaves. The man replied that the slaves didn't seem to remember anything at all, as if someone had interfered with their memories and erased them. In-woo asked if it was true that even the slave marks had been removed. The man confirmed this, explaining that there were traces of someone distorting the magic circle from within. This made In-woo conclude that it must have been someone at the level of a master. He asked if there were any other traces, but the man replied that no evidence of a martial artist or player had been found. It seemed to be the work of Einhardt's magicians or Gehenna's demons. In-woo surmised that it was probably Gehenna. After all, their true purpose must involve this. Suddenly, another man rushed over, calling out to In-woo, and reported that the corpse of the corpse dragon had disappeared. However, In-woo had expected this, knowing that if it was Gehenna, they likely had plenty of ways to use it without purifying it. He then ordered the second man to contact their headquarters and investigate every trace of Gehenna's activity on Earth, from the past year to the last month. The second man agreed and immediately rushed to headquarters. In-woo then noticed a headless body and asked the man what that trash was doing there. The man replied that Shin Hong had come to confirm the death of the slave, Lee Irun, which surprised In-woo. He thought that if it were Iraun, the one who was on the verge of becoming a high ranker, his name would have been well known by now if he hadn't touched that thing. In-woo asked about Iraun's corpse, and the man explained that about a month ago, when the slave mark broke, Irun entered the abyss. In-woo concluded that Irun must be dead, as his body wouldn't have been able to withstand the poison. He then ordered the man to wrap everything up there, as they would hunt down the remaining stragglers. The man respectfully agreed. Meanwhile, in the Dongdaemun district of Seoul, Irun entered one of the bars there. He overheard a man saying that it seemed the Volcano Guild's corpse disposal site had been attacked. This surprised the others, who asked who would be crazy enough to attack such a place. A woman responded that rumors said it was Gehenna's doing, and that it looked like they were after the corpse of the corpse dragon. She added that it seemed the truce was ending, which the others agreed with, knowing that Gehenna had interfered with the Volcano Guild. Irun realized that everyone was only talking about the Volcano Guild. Given that the guild was one of Korea's 3 great guilds, it was no surprise. He swore to himself that soon he would bring all the guilds down, but for now, they would have to wait. First, he needed to find his master Mu Wang's faction, which he believed was the most effective way to grow stronger. For someone like him with no official status, the bar was the only option to look for people. The bartender welcomed him and asked what he would like to order. He replied that he wanted Kahlua milk, but without the milk, strong and sweet with just ice. The bartender, confused, asked if he meant Kahlua milk without milk, adding that it wasn't even a real recipe. Another man overheard and told the bartender that he would handle it, suggesting the bartender organize the inventory in the storage room. The bartender agreed and left. Once the bartender was gone, the man turned to Irun and asked when they started using such an ancient code. He wondered if Irun had just returned from some gate 5 years later. Irun replied that it was more like 100 years later, further confusing the man, who then asked if he was some kind of demon. Irun denied it and asked the man if it even mattered when that bar was the kind of place for such things anyway. The head of the black market's Seoul branch, Jang Ho-seok, agreed with him and asked what he wanted. He simply replied that he wanted to take on a job. Hoseok asked if he had any specific type in mind, and he replied that he was fine with anything, but the location should be a D-rank gate, or higher. Hoseok opened the cabinet under the counter, telling him that he had just the right jobs for him. Hoseok then grabbed some documents, placed them on the counter, and told him to take his pick. He looked at the jobs and noticed a kidnapping job. Hoseok explained that the job involved luring beginners into leveling up, trapping them in a gate, and then demanding ransom from their parents. The targets were children of rich families, meaning the payout could be substantial. Hoseok added that the job fee was 200 million, with a 30% commission. He organized the documents and told Hoseok that he had brought him a trashy job. Hoseok, confused by his reaction, slowly reached for the gun under the counter while asking what was wrong with him and whether he was there to take on a job or not. Hoseok then aimed the gun at him and said that sometimes they got idiots who came there with misguided ideas of justice, trying to take the place down instead. Hoseok asked if he had considered what would happen to those who depended on that place for jobs and who he thought their anger would turn to. He quietly stared at Hoseok, who had his finger ready on the trigger. He told Hoseok not to worry, explaining that his words meant he liked it, and suggested that Hoseok tell the people behind him to lower their killing intent. Hoseok smiled, realizing he had noticed them, and told him that he guessed he could trust him with the job. Hoseok then handed him a walkie-talkie, saying he would contact him soon with the details and that he should prepare. He took the walkie-talkie, and Hoseok suggested he have a drink while he was there, adding that the place wasn't just a bar in appearance. But he declined, explaining to Hoseok that he was afraid it might become a problem. Hoseok asked why did he drove there for, to which he replied that if he drank and fell asleep, everyone there would die. Hoseok guessed he doesn't have a sense of humor and told him it wasn't mandatory, so he should suit himself. He turned to leave, telling Hoseok that he was taking his leave. Hoseok watched him walk out of the bar, thinking that he was a late bloomer with a middle school delusion complex, and that he would die soon enough at that rate. Days later, in Dasandong, Namyangju City, at a D-rank gate, a beginner waved at a man named Cheol-ho. Cheol-ho waved back at the beginner, An Min-hong, and informed his team that those beginners were the players joining his pieces this time. He added that they were like younger siblings to him, so they should take good care of them. The beginner players then bowed to their seniors as a sign of respect. Cheol-ho asked Min-hong how he felt about his first field operation. Min-hong awkwardly laughed and replied that he was a little nervous. Cheol-ho reassured them, saying there was no need to be nervous because their party members had been with him for over 3 years, which meant a D-rank gate was no big deal. Cheol-ho then pointed to the side and told the beginners that those people were wanderers, and Irun was with the wanderers group. Min-hong and his teammates were shocked upon hearing this, but one of the girls in Min-hong's group didn't express any surprise. Cheol-ho explained to Min-hong that the wanderers were martial artists, so he shouldn't worry, adding that those wanderers had been with him for over 3 years as well. This reassured Min-hong, who respectfully asked the wanderers to take care of them. Irun knew it was natural for them to feel nervous. Wanderers were notorious for doing things no better than Gehenna's demons, which was why, even in the black market, Hoseok had introduced him as a wanderer. But he noticed that one of the beginner players didn't seem all that surprised, and guessed that he had already found what he's been looking for. Hours later, inside the D-rank dungeon, the group camped in an open space to rest. Min-hong thanked Cheol, saying his experience points had increased significantly. Cheol asked Min-hong how it felt and whether he was right about the ride on the bus being awesome. Min-hong agreed but asked Cheol if they would be able to hunt on their own tomorrow. One of the men told Cheol that they had come secretly, not telling their parents, because Cheol had said they'd gain real combat experience. Cheol reassured them not to worry, explaining that he had planned a route where they could hunt as safely as possible. He placed a hand on Min-hong's shoulder and, laughing, told him that the next day they would finally get to taste some action, so they should rest up properly for now. Min-hong agreed and told Cheol they trusted him. Min-hong and his team then entered the tent to rest, leaving Cheol and his teammates behind, creepily smiling to themselves as they thought about how the beginners still believed their lies. A moment later, Irun sat silently near the bonfire when the lady approached him. She asked if she could sit next to him, and he nodded in reply. The lady sat down and asked if he was a wanderer and if he was a martial artist, what level he was. She remarked that he hadn't really stepped in during the day's hunt. He replied by asking her if she knew it was rude to ask a martial artist about their level. Surprised, she explained that she was still a newbie player and didn't know. This made him notice that she didn't even pretend to be flustered, which he found telling. She then asked if she could know his name. He stared at her for a moment, and when she met his gaze, she felt fear and looked away. He finally replied that his name was Irun. She guessed that his name sounded familiar for some reason, But before she could dwell on it, another lady called out to her. The other woman, Yoonha, reminded her that her watch was starting and told her to rest now. The lady agreed, stood up, and told Ro-Woon she would head off, adding that it was short, but she had enjoyed talking to him. Before entering the tent, Yoonha glanced back at Ro-Woon, thinking he didn't seem like a bad person, but wondering about the odd feeling she had felt during their conversation. The next day, Cheol slashed a monster's neck, and one of his members informed him that it was almost time for the gate to close. Cheol told Min Hong that the gate was about to close, and if they didn't leave now, they wouldn't be able to exit until the boss was defeated. He added that it seemed they would have to aim for real action next time. Min Hong asked if they couldn't just accompany Cheol to the boss, pointing out that the boss should be an easy fight for him. Cheol admitted it was true, but expressed concern that they might get hurt. Min Hong insisted that he was a proper player too, and argued that if he ran away every time he was scared of getting hurt, he would never become stronger. Min Hong begged Cheol not to worry and urged him to let them face the boss together. Cheol asked if Min Hong was sure, and Min Hong confidently agreed, which made Cheol smile, thinking he had successfully hooked him. Cheol proudly told them that was the spirit of a player and suggested they test their mettle by facing those guys first, pointing to a group of orcs rushing toward them. Min Hong confidently agreed, shouting that he had been waiting for this. He and his team launched their attacks at the orcs while Cheol and one of his members exchanged a knowing nod. The system then showed that the gate was closing as Min Hong struggled to block the orcs' attack. Min Hong was pushed back and shouted that they were stronger than he had expected. He called out to Cheol for help, but Cheol shouted back that it was chaotic on his side too, so Min Hong would have to handle his side on his own. Panicking, Min Hong saw the orc swing its axe down at him. Desperately, he grabbed something from his bag, thinking he hadn't expected to need it. Min Hong tore the magic circle paper to activate Fire Strike, releasing a powerful burst of flames that burned the orc to death. Min Hong was still catching his breath when Cheol shouted over, asking if he was all right. Cheol approached, apologizing for not helping right away, explaining that the aggro was overwhelming. He added that Min Hong was lucky to have had such a high-tier scroll. Min Hong explained that his father had told him to use it only in extremely dangerous situations, as it was a one-time use item. Cheol asked if that meant Min Hong didn't have any more items like it. Min Hong confirmed this, saying it had been a very expensive item. Cheol then pulled out a scroll and aimed it at Min Hong, saying it was a relief. Confused, Min Hong asked what he meant. Suddenly, Cheol used the scroll to bind Min Hong. Trapped, Min Hong shouted, asking Cheol what he was doing. He was even more shocked to see that his teammates were also bound. Cheol creepily thanked Min Hong for falling into their trap. Laughing nervously, Min Hong told Cheol to stop joking around and untie him, but Cheol slapped him hard across the face. He sneered, asking if Min Hong thought it was all a joke, just because his parents were rich. He added that it seemed he needed to make Min Hong understand, so he suggested they start by cutting off one of his ears. Min Hong panicked and stammered, pleading for Cheol to wait. Cheol froze when he heard a slash and turned to see Yoonha slaying one of his members. Shocked, Cheol barely managed to block her sword in time. He shouted, asking how she had broken the magic restraints. Yoonha calmly released her sword aura and asked him what he thought she should do. Cheol realized she was a martial artist. She swung her sword at him with force, knocking him back. Yet Cheol figured out that her martial artist status was why the magic restraint hadn't worked on her, but he couldn't believe it. His information search skill had indicated she was a player. Yoonha pointed out that Cheol didn't look like a second-rate D-rank player either, and asked if he was a first-rank C-rank. The Wanderer stepped forward, telling Cheol to step back, as martial artists should handle each other. The Wanderer approached Yoonha and commented that, judging by her sword aura, she was at the pinnacle like him, and her spirit was impressive. However, he asked if she could take on all of them. They surrounded her. She observed that her opponents included a pinnacle martial artist and 3 C ranks, realizing the odds weren't in her favor. The Wanderer launched his sword at her, shouting that if she didn't attack first, he would make the first move. Fortunately, she managed to block in time and forcefully deflected his sword with her own. The Wanderer teasingly asked what she was doing and if she planned to stay on the defensive forever. Struggling to block his attacks, Yoonha angrily pushed him back, shouting for him not to underestimate her. She launched forward, swinging her sword at him repeatedly. The Wanderer blocked all her attacks, but was surprised by her strength. However, Yoonha was also surprised when another man appeared behind her, ready to punch her. She quickly jumped away to avoid his attack, frustrated to realize that handling just one pinnacle Wanderer was already difficult enough. Cheol shouted at Ro-Woon, asking what he was doing since he hadn't hunted monsters the entire time. Cheol told Irun that if he wanted to get paid, he should catch the woman already. Irun remained silent for a moment before casually walking toward Yunha. As he approached, Yunha cursed to herself, remembering that ever since yesterday, even meeting his gaze had felt intimidating. She wondered who the hell he really was. She felt a strong killing intent from him, a feeling she thought she recognized but couldn't believe. He stared at her in silence, recalling his master Mu Wang's words that he was the master of the divine demon cult. Irun had responded to Mu Wang that he had heard of the demon cult, but asked what the divine demon cult was. Mu Wang had replied that the roots of the demon cult lay in the divine demon cult. Irun had then asked Mu Wang if the demon cult wasn't the sworn enemy of all factions, known for disrupting and overthrowing the world. Mu Wang had asked him in return if that was how he saw him, to which Irun had clarified that wasn't what he meant. Mu Wang explained that after he left, the Martial Alliance had spread propaganda as they pleased, portraying the cult as evil. In truth, they were just simple and pitiful beings. Mu Wang had added that when Irun returned, he should take good care of them. Irun's thoughts returned to the present as he recognized that even if Yunha could fool others, she couldn't fool his eyes. Her power was undoubtedly rooted in demonic cultivation. He remembered a slave once telling him that remnants of the demon cult could be found in the black market, where they rescued kidnapped people and recruited them into their faith. The slave had confessed that he had been caught in human trafficking and ended up learning about it firsthand. At the time, Irun had dismissed it as nonsense, but now he realized how useful that information was. The Wanderer broke his thoughts, asking what he was staring at and whether he planned to attack. Irun responded by telling the Wanderer to shut up, shocking Cheol and prompting the Wanderer to ask what he had just said. Irun asked the Wanderer if he was deaf and repeated that his breath reeked, so he should shut up. Yunha was just as confused as Cheol. The Wanderer turned to Cheol and asked what was wrong with Irun. Cheol replied that he wasn't exactly sure, explaining that he had simply hired Irun from the black market to clean things up if the situation went south. The Wanderer then asked if that meant it wouldn't matter if he killed Irun. Without waiting for a response, the Wanderer slashed Irun, only to be shocked when his sword shattered upon impact with the black spheres in Irun's hand. The Wanderer couldn't believe his aura-imbued sword had been cut down so easily and realized that Irun was a master far beyond his level. The thought crossed his mind that could Irun be at the transcendent level. Cheol's teammate rushed forward, shouting in panic, asking what was wrong with Irun and ordering everyone to attack all at once. Irun calmly reminded them that the gate was closed, meaning killing everyone wouldn't matter anymore. The Wanderer tried to stop them, but Irun said it was too late and unleashed his black spheres, piercing their bodies. The spheres absorbed their internal energy as the Wanderer concluded that Irun was at least a supreme master. Moments later, the black spheres exploded, and Irun watched with a blank face as their bodies disappeared. He turned his gaze to Heol, who was stuttering in fear. Irun asked if Heol really had the leisure to focus on him alone. Heol froze, suddenly feeling Yunha behind him, but it was too late. Yunha swung her sword, decapitating Cheol in one strike. His head hit the ground with a dull thud, followed by his lifeless body. Irun stared at Yuna, who was catching her breath in exhaustion, and asked if it was his turn now. She sheathed her sword, replying that there was no way she could fight him, and she wasn't foolish enough to try, knowing she'd die. He reminded her that he had been part of Cheol's party just moments ago, but she countered by pointing out that he had wiped them all out himself. She told him not to pretend they were on the same side and guessed that he must have a goal. Whatever his goal was, she offered to help him, asking if he would spare her if she did. He asked her back, what if he wants her life? She was surprised but calmly replied that if he wanted her life, he would have taken it already. He realized she was sharp. Before they could speak further, a loud growl interrupted them. They turned to see a massive monster approaching. Irun calmly asked if it was the gate boss and reminded her that she said she'd help. He told her to handle the monster and get them out of there, confusing her further. Nonetheless, she replied, yes, and rushed to fight the boss. A moment later, they emerged from the dungeon. Min Hong collapsed to his knees, unable to believe they were outside. He and his team were shaking with fear but furious over Cheol's betrayal. Yunha told Min Hong that she guessed she had let Cheol off too easily. Recognizing her, Min Hong and his team thanked her for saving their lives. He then asked why she had hidden the fact that she was a martial artist and joined their newbie party. She pointed to a man in a suit and told Min Hong that he would explain. The man approached and told them to get in the car, promising to escort them home and explain on the way. They agreed and drove off with the man. Yuna turned back to Iraun and asked how she could help him now. Iraun replied that he wanted to ask her one thing first. She asked what it was, and he questioned whether she was from the Heavenly Sect or the Blood Sect. Shocked, she stammered, asking what he meant by that. He asked again if she wasn't a demon cult member and assured her he had no intention of reporting her to the Martial Alliance. Her expression hardened, and she furiously glared at him, asking if he was part of the cult. He noticed her sudden change in demeanor and asked if that meant she would allow him to act that way toward her if he were a cult member. She demanded he answer, repeatedly asking if he was part of the cult. He simply reminded her that he had asked first. Suddenly, men in suits surrounded him, swords aimed at his neck. He remained calm, telling her this was her last chance to answer. He asked her again if she was from the Heavenly Sect or the Blood Sect. The men couldn't believe the overwhelming pressure radiating from Iraun, wondering if he was a monster. Yuna shouted that she was from the Blood Sect, shocking her men. She ordered them to put away their swords, explaining that Iraun was her benefactor. The men hesitated, reminding her that he knew about their existence. Fearfully, she stared at them and explained that if Iraun wanted, killing all of them wouldn't even be a challenge, making any threats against him meaningless. Her men, trembling, finally put their swords down. She turned to Iraun and said she had answered his question, so now it was his turn to answer hers. She asked again if he was a follower of the religion. Lowering his aura, he calmly replied that, for now, they could just say he was a follower. Yuna admitted she still didn't understand what her benefactor desired, but promised to help with anything. She asked if he would tell her his goal now, or if they should go together. He replied that he would accompany her. They entered a luxury van together. As they settled in, Yuna excused herself, explaining she needed some air. She then held her face, which stretched like silicone, and slowly removed it. Confused, Iraun realized she was peeling off an infinite mask. After removing it, she took off the hair tie holding her hair, revealing an even more striking and enhanced beauty. He remarked that she was quite beautiful, and she thanked him, asking if he was showing his real face. He replied that it had changed a bit from before. She asked if Iraun was his real name, and when he simply said yes, she was surprised. He added that it was now his turn to ask questions. Referring to her party members, like An Min Hong, he noted that they seemed clueless about her identity. He then asked if the promise to take them home was a lie. He added that, judging by her infinite mask worth billions and the limousine, it was clear money wasn't an issue for her. He asked if her real goal was recruiting followers for the cult. She admitted that he was correct, explaining that her original plan had been to build rapport and gradually recruit them, but Cheol had messed things up. Yawning, he remarked that rich kids must bring in incredible amounts of donations, and asked if that was how she had made her money so far. She responded that while they collected donations, they didn't demand absurd amounts like the associations did. Ultimately, what they wanted was a guild. She explained that joining the cult came with the condition of helping establish a guild, so it wasn't exactly a losing deal for players. He guessed that guilds were essential for players who couldn't progress without leveling up. She then turned the question back to him, asking what martial arts technique he had used at the gate. He noted how aggressive she was for jumping straight to identifying his technique. She explained that she had shared the cult's secret, so she deserved to know at least that much. He replied that he couldn't use his martial arts for now, shocking her. She found it hard to believe, considering he had destroyed a pinnacle martial artist's head. He calmly explained that it was like a version of Tanji Gong, asking if she even considered that martial arts. He then shifted the topic, asking what the cult was doing in Huxi. She asked if he meant the special commissions, and explained that they took commissions in Huxi to gain experience for their followers. He asked if that included things like kidnapping or murder. She shouted that their cult should not be lumped in with such scum, explaining that they only hunted red players or infamous rogues. He asked if recruiting followers was also a goal. She calmly replied that he was correct. Iraun thought they weren't as bad as Muwang had described. In fact, the Hwasun Guild felt more like a villainous group to him. Yuna then hesitated before asking one last question. Was he the infamous comrade killer Iraun? Her question triggered a strong reaction. Iraun released an intense presence, and the entire limousine shook. She, along with the car, trembled in fear. She wondered why her body wouldn't move. Even though she was at the pinnacle herself, she felt that his presence was like that person. A demonic man she remembered. He calmed himself after seeing her reaction, which allowed her to catch her breath. She peeked at him, wondering if his display was a warning. The limousine stopped, and he noted they had arrived. The driver opened the door, and he ordered Yunha to lead the way. They stepped out in front of the Ganga Group building, with S-rank chairman Kang Han-cheol standing at the forefront. Irun knew the corporation was massively influential across South Korea and Asia. He couldn't believe the Ganga building was the headquarters of the blood cult. Yuna asked if he would go in, and he asked if she would let him go if he said no. She replied that if he wanted to enter, he would go in regardless. He told her that even if he didn't, they would keep chasing him. Eventually, he would be hunted by both the Hwasun Guild and the blood cult, which shocked her, confirming in her mind that he truly was the Irun. He added that if he kidnapped her, perhaps the pursuit would